Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into the turbulent, totally transformative story of how the 1066 Norman conquest completely rewired the English language. We're going to look at how a violent military invasion basically turned into a massive cultural merger, creating the rich, hybrid vocabulary that you and I are using literally right now.
All right, let's kick things off with a pretty mind-blowing fact. After William the Conqueror successfully invaded England at the Battle of Hastings, he didn't just take the throne, he brought an entire French-speaking ruling class with him. So for the monarchy, English instantly became a foreign tongue. In fact, it was an astonishing 300 years before an English king, Henry IV to be exact, actually spoke English as his first language. Just think about that. For over 3 centuries, the absolute highest seat of power in England was occupied by native French speakers.
And to really grasp the massive scale of this linguistic invasion, just take a look at the modern English dictionary. Estimates show that anywhere from 1/3 to a staggering 2/3 of all the words we use today actually have French origins. So the Norman invasion wasn't just a political shift, right? It was a complete top-to-bottom vocabulary overhaul.
Part 1. 1066. A linguistic invasion.
So, when those French-speaking Normans violently ousted the English ruling class in 1066, they brought a lot more than just swords and castles across the Channel. They brought over 10,000 brand-new Norman words. Almost overnight, Anglo-Saxon dialects were completely pushed out of the royal court, the justice system, and the church. But, as the renowned linguist Otto Jespersen points out here, this French influence didn't just enrich the vocabulary. It actually helped simplify English grammar by stripping away a lot of the older, clunky Germanic endings. As the text highlights, French culture made a profound, permanent, and passionate impact on how we communicate.
Part 2. The Trilingual Realm.
Now, following the conquest, England didn't just flip a switch and start speaking French. It wasn't that simple. Instead, it transformed into this highly stratified trilingual society. You literally had 3 distinct languages operating side by side. Imagine stepping into a 13th century courtroom. The judge, being part of the elite, is laying down the law in high register French. The clerk, who is trained by the church or universities, is over there furiously scribbling the official records in Latin, and meanwhile, the everyday plaintiffs and defendants, they're just standing there muttering to each other in English. It was a linguistic hierarchy that perfectly mirrored the social hierarchy.
But here's the crucial point. Language in this era was a bridge just as much as it was a barrier. Even though the elite spoke French, they still had to govern an English-speaking populace. By 1258, officials like King Henry III realized that, for their authority to be legitimate, it actually had to be understood. So he issued these unprecedented trilingual proclamations: Latin, French, and English, all at once. He did this to ensure the laws of the land were fully grasped by every single subject, completely regardless of their social standing.
Part 3. The Culinary Myth.
Now, this massive class division brings us to a really famous historical legend about the conquered English and the ruling Normans. You might have heard this one. The story goes that English-speaking peasants were the ones out in the mud tending the live animals, so those animals kept their Anglo-Saxon names: cow, sheep, pig. But the French-speaking nobility, they only saw these animals when they were served as sumptuous, cooked meals in the banquet hall, giving us the French terms beef, mutton, and pork. It's a neat little story that perfectly frames a society divided by labor and luxury.
But here's the catch. This iconic culinary myth wasn't actually coined in the Middle Ages. It was heavily popularized way later, in the 19th century, mostly by Sir Walter Scott in his famous novel Ivanhoe. His writing took this deeply romanticized image of the oppressed Anglo-Saxon peasantry facing off against the wealthy Norman aristocracy and just embedded it directly into our cultural imagination. And I mean, it sounds like perfect logic, doesn't it?
Well, modern scholars have actually completely busted this myth. Extensive linguistic research shows that when these French loanwords first popped up around the year 1300, words like beef or pork were used to describe both things. They meant the living, breathing animal out in the pasture and the cooked meat on the table. That neat, clean split in definitions that we use today, that didn't actually solidify until the 1500s, centuries after the Norman conquest.
Part 4. Law, Order, and Latin. So while the culinary myth is mostly fiction, the massive influx of French and Latin terms into the official domains of the state is absolute, undeniable historical fact. Just look at this breakdown. The foundational, everyday roles on the left retain their native English origins, words like king or sheriff. But then look at how overwhelmingly French and Latin totally dominate the terminology of power, administration, justice, and refined living. State, crime, jury, army, captain.
The Normans didn't just tweak things, they completely rewrote the vocabulary of authority in England. And because Latin was the rigid language of court records, a practice that staggeringly lasted all the way until 1731, the precision required was immense, and honestly, sometimes pretty hilarious. A single grammatical error could literally be fatal to a legal case. Get this. In 1667, a judge actually threw out a breach of contract case over upholstery because a clerk accidentally wrote quattro pictus pellices, which is the Latin word for painted prostitutes, instead of the word for painted hangings. Because a contract for illegal services was void, the plaintiff lost absolutely everything, all over a tiny slip of the pen. Crazy, right?
Part 5. Spelling and grammar shifts.
Beyond just injecting new vocabulary and dealing with those strict Latin records, Norman scribes fundamentally altered the very way English looked and functioned on the physical page. When they started writing down English words, they just couldn't wrap their heads around the old Germanic runic letters and sounds. So what do? They just introduced their own French spelling conventions. Notice how the harsh Anglo-Saxon qua in CWEN became the elegant qui in queen? The ska became shif for ship. They literally reshaped the orthography, giving us the modern spellings of words like church, house, and night that we're still writing today. And as time went on, the strict boundaries between these languages really began to blur. They started merging through a process called hybridism. English speakers began freely mixing native English root words with French prefixes and suffixes. It's like a giant puzzle. You take an Old English word like drink, slap a French suffix like able on the end of it, and boom, you've got a brand new hybrid word, drinkable. Or you combine the English over with the French power to get overpower. The languages were totally fusing together.
Part 6. The Triumph of Hybridity. Despite being heavily suppressed in the upper echelons of society for centuries, the native English language didn't drown, not at all. As the nobility gradually lost their territories in mainland France, most notably around 1204, this new isolated English identity really began to form. By the mid-14th century, the linguistic tide turned rapidly. By 1349, Oxford University was actually instructing in English. By 1362, Parliament opened with a speech in English for the first time in nearly 300 years. And when William Caxton introduced the printing press in 1476, this new, beautifully hybrid English was mass-produced and standardized for everyone.
And as English reclaimed its dominance, it sometimes pushed back hard against the French. Interestingly, English lawyers around the year 1500 deliberately revived the old, straightforward Anglo-Saxon word manslaughter. Why? Well, they did it specifically to escape the incredibly confusing, highly technical baggage that had become attached to the French legal term chômage. English was proving to be incredibly adaptable, essentially just picking up whichever linguistic tool worked best for the job.
Ultimately, the story of the Norman conquest proves that global code switching and linguistic borrowing isn't some modern internet-age phenomenon. Not even close. It's built into the very DNA of the language. English's greatest power has never been its purity. Its greatest power by far is its ability to absorb, adapt, and totally assimilate the world around it. Which leaves us with a truly fascinating thought to ponder today. If the English we speak right now is the result of centuries of mixing, conquered dialects, French aristocrats, and Latin scholars, well, as our world becomes instantly connected, constantly mixing endless new dialects, digital slang, and global influences, what exactly is the English language going to look like 300 years from right now? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the words you use every single day.